direct conversation, some deep reactions, please. All this comics narration ain't late me. A little more talk, a lot less read. A little fight, baby, is what I need. Close the trade, open up your brains. Explain it to me. Explain it to me, baby. Explain it to me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Rhett Conversations, where we explain strange, confusing, and in some cases, just really bad storylines. My name is Josh Wasta, a.k.a. Fallout Fury. My co-host, the lovely Leia Cameron, is with us.
Hello.
Having survived reading what we are covering today, which is the 90s Spider-Man Clone Saga, Part 1. But, as always, we have somebody that wants us to explain it to them. And so our guest for this show is Kyle Slack. Kyle, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Kyle, you haven't been on any sort of graphically novel production before, so we like our new guests to give us a little background with their history with comic books.
Okay. I have not done much in comic books. I've read a couple, like, here and there, while stuck in a Barnes & Noble waiting for people to finish things, much like that's how I learned about Spider-Man's new suit during Civil War and was confused, or when he was a god or something. I don't really know. And I remember when I was younger, my mom was like, oh, here's an X-Men comic. It was like Storm with a mohawk, and she'd lost her powers, and there was something about her married to Dracula. I don't really remember, but again, this is about confusing things, so.
Yeah, Mohawk Storm.
Yes, it was like she was with the Giant Avengers or whatever, or not the Giant Avengers, Giant X-Men, because she was with like Cyclops and some other people before he went evil. I'm not sure on that storyline. But most of my background in this is going to come from the cartoons. I watched the Spider-Man cartoon growing up, watched X-Men, kind of got me into those things. My dad was more of a movie and TV show buff, so that's kind of where all my geekdom went. But if he'd been into comic books, I'm sure I would have gotten into that harder core then than anything else.
So going into this then, not having much of a background in comics, what do you know about the Spider-Man Clone Saga?
I know that there was someone called the Scarlet Spider, and I saw like one comic of his at some point where somehow they were implying that now this is probably completely wrong, but he was like Uncle Ben reincarnated or took Uncle Ben's name or something, and at some point people liked him. And outside of that, going into this, I didn't have much outside of, like, in the comics, they did a clone thing with after Mary Jane, or not the comics, the cartoon, after Mary Jane disappeared, and there was that water guy that was a clone and melted, and there was a clone of Mary Jane, and somehow this ties into the Madam Web storyline, I guess, in the cartoon, and those are things I've heard. So
yeah, there was a lot. Leia, your first time reading this, right?
Yes.
How do you feel?
I fucking hate clones.
I think that's a universal reaction to clones, but
yeah. They're this was so. I'm not. I don't have a lot of experience with Spider-Man. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have a problem with Spider-Man. It just I've never really been super into him as far as comics go. I'm much more of a Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe person than I am in Spider-Man in the comics person. That's
Tom Holland.
Yeah, sweet precious angel Tom Holland. And so I, upon reading this, was struck by something, and I don't know if anybody's ever addressed this or not, but Spider-Man has always historically been a character that's really popular with kids, right? Like, he was the first Marvel superhero to get his own cartoon. Mm-hmm. He's always been perennially fiercely popular with young kids and things like that. But for whatever reason, it seems like the actual comics that the character's based in are like way too over the head of any of what maybe should be the target audience. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right? Yeah. No. So there are different lines with Marvel. Like, there's a kid-friendly line that started in the late 2000s. But the reason for this being as confusing and dark as it is, it pretty much boils down to the 90s.
They were a crazy time. 90s were a crazy time.
Right. So, all right. Well, let's jump into it. Kyle, are you ready?
Oh yeah, I've got my drink. I've got some random
Good.
questions I came up with beforehand. We'll see if those get answered.
Okay, awesome. So for people tuning in for the first time, this is how it will go. I will be the deep dive. I will be Professor J for today. And Kyle, during my explanation, as our guest and as the person that is asking us to explain it to them, can stop the entirety of the show at any point to ask any question that he chooses relevant to the material. It could be, hey, who is Peter Parker? Or, what happened to his parents? Or what the fuck? Those are all legitimate questions.
Are we gonna actually answer what happened to his parents? Because sometimes they're spies, sometimes they're just dead.
Well, they're dead spies most of the time. But yes. So at that point that Kyle asked that question, Leia will be the person that will come in and answer it as the second reference. If she can't, she can ask, for help. But
phone a friend, if you will.
Yes. But the questions part of it, the answers lie on Leia. So as we start the Clone Saga, I'm just going to do a preface here. We are not going to do the whole Clone Saga because it was a 2-year long. The main story was 53 issues, but it went closer to 150 issues across multiple lines. And so the parts that we will be doing are the beginning, called Birth of a Spider-Man, the Parker Legacy, and Power and Responsibility, which all leads up to what is considered the first part of the Clone Saga. There was another part in there called The Lost Years, which is the clone fucking around and doing other things. And it really wasn't relevant to what we were going over. So who knows, possibly someone will ask us to do it next season or the season after, and we may go further into it, or we might just fucking kill ourselves.
I was going to say, I would respectfully invite that person to go fuck themselves.
One of my questions was, I heard there were 2 or 3 different Clone Sagas, so I wasn't sure what you were gonna cover.
Yes, this was a continuation out of the 1960s Clone Saga, which introduced a villain called the Jackal, which we'll go over all of that. Because this Clone Saga was almost like a retelling, and they retconned basically how the clone came to be. So the other part of that is sort of confusing, but comics, is that obviously between the 60s and the 90s are 30 years. The comic treats it as 5 because otherwise Peter Parker would be very, very old. And people don't age correctly in comics. So the part that we will go over on how the clone became, that we're going to start with, called Birth of a Spider-Man, is the retelling of the original Clone Saga that happened in the 60s. And so when we start on that, we see a panel that just has bubbles floating in black, and it says darkness, light, oblivion, to which in my head I got Lego Batman going, darkness, no parents. But
same, to be honest.
Yeah. A needle injects a cell that's suspended in the liquid. The cell grows into a baby in liquid. The baby grows into a toddler, then a teen, then an adult. It has wires and kind of matrixy stuff coming out of it. And then all of the speech bubbles and all of that are basically a lot of philosophical who am I talk. Until we see Peter Parker emerge from a tank covered in liquid and with a bunch of matrixy wires coming out of his shoulders and his spine. And he is greeted by Professor Miles Warren, who was an instructor for him and Gwen Stacy back in the 60s and is also known as the villain, the Jackal. And the Jackal's power set is hypnosis and being a clone scientist.
So that's why clones? They just wanted him because he's a clone scientist?
That is why clones. That is why clones.
They've got Spider-Verse, Multiverse, Evil Doubles, all that stuff, but they decided to go clones just because he was a clone scientist in the 60s?
Yes, and this is way before Spider-Verse. This is way before we get into that. And Professor Warren refers to him as my newly born friend. He hands Peter something to wear. Peter's confused and hesitates, which Freak smiles out and he snaps at him, yelling at him to obey, saying, he created Peter, specifically says Peter, and Peter will do as he says. Peter responds instinctually and punches him, then grabs him and kind of lifts him up, and then drops him and kind of stares shocked at his hands because he was working on instinct and he didn't mean to punch and grab him. To which Miles gets even more pissed and calls him as arrogant and blind to human life as the wretch I cloned you from, giving us the first hint that this is a clone of Peter Parker. Until Peter shows up, the real Peter, I will refer to this as Peter. Eventually, I will call it Clone Peter, and as we'll find out, eventually Ben.
So
yes.
Did he somehow give him Peter's memories? Or is he just like, I've made you a clone, now I'm going to call you Peter Parker, and you have all this knowledge because you're genetically Peter Parker?
So, yeah, it's not really clearly explained how he does this, but yes, the clone does have Peter's memories and like personal morals, I guess, for lack of a better term, but they're not immediately made clear.
So Miles uses a sonic device to stagger Peter before punching him and knocking him out, yelling, "I hate you, Parker, for what you did to her, for what you did to me." So
he made a clone just to beat up because he hates Peter Parker.
I
mean, that's some anger hate right there.
That's some next level go to therapy bullshit.
Oh, you don't like this person you grew up with? Here's a clone. Take out your anger. They're just a clone. It doesn't matter.
They're not like a person.
I know.
So weeks pass. Miles has put Peter in a cell and has been injecting him with different materials. And then, yes.
Does he know that Peter is Spider-Man?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, at so least, he knows.
Yes. Yep. And somehow he got his DNA.
Also never explained.
Yes.
Well, I mean, Peter just leaves it all over the place with those webs, but...
So Miles keeps doing sessions and injecting him, and he starts very nice and nurturing, and inevitably will end by being abusive and beating him. Finally, Peter's had enough, beats up Miles, and escapes, and also saying his first words, which are, "I'm human."
I'm Batman. I'm human.
No.
I'm Batman.
That would be a whole level of confusing that we don't have time for.
Right.
Yes.
Darkness, no parents. A very overwhelmed Peter runs through New York, leaping from building to building, using his spider powers by accident.
Stop. Yep. Why does he have spider powers? I thought Peter Parker had to get bitten by a radioactive spider, or is this after genetic spider bit him, or whatever?
I feel like, and it was, again, never outright stated, but I feel like it's implied that the spider bite altered Peter's DNA, and so the clone just kind of got that in the DNA cocktail.
Okay, we'll go with that. It's comics.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is not a hard scientific text.
Yes. So
they better cite their sources and have this peer reviewed.
As he's jumping around from building to building, at one point he starts to fall, clings to a wall. His spider sense goes off. He's really freaked out by that because he doesn't really understand what the powers are. He's using it all on instinct. He climbs to the top of a building, and on the roof he's found by Miles, who is now dressed as his villain persona, the Jackal. They fight. And generally, unless something really important happens in a fight, I'm just going to say they fight because I don't need to describe the fight. While they're fighting, Jackal says he's the only one that can tell him the truth. Peter beats him down and is about to smash and kill him when Gwen Stacy appears and tells him he's not a killer.
Okay,
yes.
Now, I didn't read the comics, but I do know that before Mary Jane, there was Gwen Stacy, and she died falling somehow.
She did.
Yes, that is correct.
And Peter didn't save her, and it pissed off people. That's about all I know about her.
I wouldn't say
I'm not
necessarily...
looking at current Gwenpool and all that stuff. I'm just
right
back in the past.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the Gwen Stacy thing is a pretty pivotal and well-known comics moment, in as much as Peter tries to save her, and literally inches before she hits the ground, he shoots a web to save her, and it snaps, the force of it, the physics behind it basically snaps her neck. So he inadvertently kills her while trying to save her. So this is a big pivotal moment for Peter Parker in the comics, and shapes a lot of his actions questions going after that.
And for years, it was actually questioned whether or not the snap that is on the panel was the snap of the web going taut, or was the snap of her neck. And, by the 90s, they pretty much were like, we don't talk about it a lot, but yeah, that was her neck snapping.
As you said, Spider-Man for kids.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. It never really struck me as until I started reading this that I was like, what the? Okay.
So this is when... This is when Peter's memories start to come back a little bit because he recognizes Gwen, and they rush to one another and share a kiss before Jackal walks up behind and knocks Peter out. Gwen asks why he hurt Peter, and Jackal says he had to, and confirms that she trusts him, right? To which she says yes.
That's ouch.
Yeah.
That's ouch.
Jackal then reveals to absolutely no one for no reason that she's under hypnotic control. And soon Peter will be too, because villains got a
monologue.
Yep. Police interrupt, and Jackal gets away with the clones, revealing that he will soon use them to destroy the real Peter Parker. So, any questions thus far?
Outside of apparently Warren needing a little time, not with his science, but we'll keep going. We'll keep going.
The next issue opens with the clone Peter putting on the suit. Somehow he has Spider-Man suit and asking Miles who he is. Miles says the injections and hypnosis sessions are a slow process. Peter gets impatient, so Miles triggers a hypnotic session, basically knocking him unconscious and putting him into his own subconscious for Peter to relive his worst traumas.
He's a clone. I mean, his trauma is he punched you. I mean,
you'd think, but again, I really need to stress the people who are writing these are not, in fact, scientists, psychologists, or anybody else that has a PhD at minimum after their name.
It starts with Uncle Ben telling him his parents are dead, and little kid Peter blaming himself.
Obviously, it's his fault. I mean, come on.
Right. It then goes to Uncle Ben dying and Aunt May asking why Peter let him die. Finally, Gwen's death, but instead of reliving it, she just appears to him and tells him he tries and is a good man, which at first he kind of, starts to fight and say, no, I'm a horrible person. But this changes to the forms of his parents, Aunt May, Uncle Ben, and Gwen all being around him and saying they don't blame him, they love him. And as they do, the Jackal appears and tries to dismiss it all, saying Peter is a vile and worthless individual, to which Peter fights the Jackal and wakes up from the session. The Jackal, or Miles, outside of the session, doesn't know what happened during the unconscious session. So he wakes up, he starts to ask Miles some questions, and Miles says basically a trigger word to put him back to sleep, but a normal sleep, saying he just needs a final few refinements to Peter's programming.
Okay.
Finally,
Clone Manchurian candidate vibe there.
Right.
A little bit, yeah.
Clone Peter wakes up in Shea Stadium in full Spider-Man costume. Jackal and Gwen are in the stands looking at him, and he is facing another Spider-Man, and that is where that issue ends.
The Spider-Man meme before the Spider-Man meme.
Yes, it's the Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man.
That's pretty much, if this were a YouTube series instead of a podcast, I would just post that up and be like, that's it, that's the show.
I was gonna say, if you need a thumbnail.
So both Spider-Men wake up facing one another. Both seem to have the same memories and thoughts because for a while they're saying the same things at the same time, reacting in the same way. Jackal reveals that he has made a clone of Peter Parker and that only the true Spider-Man can free Ned Leeds, who is a Daily Bugle reporter that I had never remembered existed and apparently was a thing for a hot minute.
He's supposed to be like the Jimmy Olsen of this?
Kind of. He was married to Betty Brant. She was another person at the Daily Bugle, blink and miss it love interest for Peter at one point, much before everything else. But basically, there's a bomb strapped to Ned Leeds, and the Jackal says that only the true Spider-Man can save him. The Spider-Men fight.
Because you can't be me. We have to.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
That's the only natural conclusion when you meet your clone. You can't be friends with them. You must fight them. It's the law.
You have to figure out which one needs to grow the evil goatee.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
You
Absolutely.
got to establish dominance early with your clones.
In the first of many things that happen and don't necessarily make sense, Gwen rips the jackal mask off of Miles and tears it up. This somehow gives him a moment of clarity where he sees that he is the villain and he goes to save Ned, but dies in the resulting explosion.
Okay, so she just took his mask off. He's like, oh, I'm the bad guy. I don't have a mask anymore?
Yeah, but essentially...
I'm taking a drink.
Yep.
That one.
Yep.
I mean,
we are all doing that.
I don't drop F-bombs like your other guests that you let me listen to, but that may need one. I'm just like, what?
Yeah, it makes about as much sense on a page as it does in the explanation, I assure you.
I mean, this is it's like, oh, hey, let's have a character arc in a few words.
Pretty much.
Spider-Man wakes up post-explosion alone. There's nobody else around him.
So we don't know if other guy that he was supposed to save and died, or
we don't know. No, we don't know what happened. There is a part later that explains it, but it is written many years later.
Yes.
Jimmy, no! I mean, I don't even remember the guy's name now, so he must not have been important.
But all he thinks is, I need to head home. I need to see Mary Jane. And when he gets home, he sees Peter Parker holding Mary Jane in the window. And he goes to confront who he believes is the clone when a psychic explosion in his mind reveals that he is, in fact, the clone. Angry at the world, the clone Peter decides he needs to leave New York and falls to his knees in the rain crying.
Melodramatic.
It's
melodramatic.
So melodramatic.
Now
it reads like a parody of itself, except you realize about like halfway through that the authors were dead ass serious.
Yes. Yeah.
Just add in the Darth Vader. No. Maybe add in the scene from Shawshank because he's crawling out of the pipe and he falls in the mud and the rain. No!
So the parts that are written way later, what I'm going to add to this is that there is a scene that is left out of this that is retconned in later, where Peter Parker wakes up and basically like the Jackal's dead, Ned's okay, and he lets him go, but he thinks that the clone Peter is dead, so he puts him in an industrial smokestack incinerator, being like, well, that'll just take care of all the evidence.
What?
Yep.
And somehow
murder hobo. I mean, this screams D&D. Murder hobo.
He thinks he was just getting rid of a body. He thought the clone was
yes, because that's how you.
And somehow the incinerator doesn't kill the clone, and he actually ends up in Brooklyn. I haven't read that part.
Okay.
I have not. But I looked to see because it wasn't included in the complete Clone Saga epic. So book 1 of 5. There is a section here that I'm not going to do called The Lost Years. That is basically the clone Peter waking up and like leaving town. And kind of this is where he becomes Ben Reilly because he decides to take Uncle Ben's name and Aunt May's maiden name of Riley and combine them.
Is this when he dyes his hair blonde and like
that's later?
Weird. Okay, because that's the one comic I saw of Scarlet Spider. He had like the blonde hair and weird stuff going on.
Right, and we will not end this episode explaining really the Scarlet Spider stuff. He does eventually become the Scarlet Spider. He and Peter live in the same town, and he is Ben Reilly, Peter Parker's cousin, who looks exactly like him but with blonde hair.
Okay.
Yeah. So power and responsibility is kind of the next. There's the Parker legacy and the Lost Years. But power and responsibility starts. Now, keep in mind, I didn't realize this until I started reading it because they refer to things that that have happened in the Clone Saga before in the first part. But when I was trying to write down issue numbers, the issue numbers started doubling, like being the same one. And it's because when they released this, the first half of the comic was the early Clone Saga retcon. The second half of the same comic was the story moving forward. So reading this, not only are you slowly getting the clone stuff, you're slowly getting what happens modern day at the same time. Because I don't know, because Marvel decided that was a great idea. So Power and Responsibility starts with Aunt May having a stroke and going into a coma. She has recently reconnected. Ben has started to call her and basically kind of reconnect as a long lost relative.
She doesn't know he's a clone. She just
no. She doesn't even know Peter.
Okay.
She doesn't even know Peter's Spider-Man. So
well, I mean she's oblivious to that. That's fine. But
right.
I mean, oh, you look exactly like Peter, but with blonde hair. Oh, I'm a long lost cousin.
Right.
Okay.
Sure, I accept this.
Obviously. Can I see your family tree? Because I don't remember having sisters or brothers.
So MJ is the one that finds Aunt May and sends her to the hospital in an ambulance. So she's waiting at May's house by the phone for Peter to call on the landline because she hasn't heard from him and has no way of getting a hold of him because it's the 90s. Ben Reilly calls May's phone and MJ picks up and says that she needs to free the lineup, but that May had a stroke and is in the hospital. Ben leaves everything behind of wherever he is. I think he's like working in some other scientific lab and heads for New York. While Ben is trying to get in, he gets to New York, and while he's trying to get in to see May, Peter shows up, causing Ben to leave because he looks exactly like Peter at this point. So Ben sees Peter and is like, well, I can't visit May now because Peter's here to visit her, so I gotta bounce, and leaves. Peter talks to the nurse and also leaves because he doesn't want to face May in her current condition. So no one visits May.
Yeah.
Both of them show up, neither person visits her.
She's not important anyway. It's okay.
From outside the hospital, Ben calls and is told by a nurse that May has stabilized. So at least she's still in a coma, but at least her life is not in danger currently. Ben does what absolutely Ben would do in this situation, visiting New York, and goes and visits Gwen's grave.
Okay.
MJ,
did we find out what happened to the clone, to the Gwen that unmasked him already? Like, was she presumed dead too, or did Peter not notice her?
She just disappears.
Yeah.
Like that's it. That's like it's never really explained what happens to her. She's
not
just
in
gone.
this. I'm sure diving deeper we could find out.
True.
But
Very true. But we as far as I read, she just served her purpose in the narrative and then returned to her home planet like Poochie.
We don't need her anymore. We got Mary Jane. We're good.
Right. Meanwhile, MJ talks to Coma May and basically says she's leaving town to go and confront her father's abuse, like basically face her father and sister who were abusive to her so she can profit, save her marriage. It's not really made clear. She's like, I have to go and face my past trauma.
Peace out. You're in a coma.
To face my past trauma, and it will make my life better, I guess.
Yeah. It's really very nebulous and very not explained very well at all.
just telling the person in the coma and nobody else.
Yes. Like, I must go. Good day.
I hope you wake up someday and tell Peter where I went so he can find the body. I mean, I'm going to confront this abusive couple, but not tell anybody where I'm going. I wonder what happened to Mary Jane. Haven't seen her in a while.
Yeah, seems safe, right?
Have
seems
to go
normal.
Start scouting the incinerators.
Smokestacks.
So Ben goes and visits his old high school like a creeper. Like there is I don't know why it's even there scene where he goes to his high school. He talks with basically the high school security guard.
Yeah, it's not quite a cop.
How old is Peter or Ben supposed to be at this point? Like, are they just out of high school? I know you said 5 years from the 60s to the 90s passed in canon.
I would guess mid-20s at this point because
Yeah.
he's mid-30s now in current continuity.
Yeah, it seemed like he was like ambiguously in his 20s from what I gleaned from it.
Right. It's
No,
like asking how
you don't-
old is Bruce Wayne?
Yeah.
You know, it's comic books, especially ones that run so long. I mean, you can have it explained if it's something like Wonder Woman or Superman, because they are gods/aliens. But when you're dealing with people, it's a lot more difficult.
Now, some random bits of comic knowledge in my head. Didn't Flash work at the high school at some point? Is this pre or post that, or?
That's post that, yeah.
Okay,
Flash
I wasn't
Thompson,
sure if like he showed up and ran into him or anything. So
Nope. He just walks around the high school at night. This guy's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I used to go here," and he's like,
just a perfectly normal thing that adults do all the time.
Right.
Okay, it's midnight. I'm gonna call the cops. Is that all right? Sure. Don't worry. I'll just be on the ceiling.
Yeah, you know what? It's midnight. I'm gonna go to my my old high school and just like wander around the grounds for a little while.
Just kind of hang out. You know.
Yeah, this is a perfectly normal thing for people to do.
Well, I don't know about you, but
Meanwhile, Peter has had some fight somewhere with a villain named Shriek, who she does exactly what you think she does.
Banshee powers?
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah.
But the end result of that is that he brings her to the same hospital that May is at and realizes he should probably check up on his comatose aunt that he seems to care about. This is also where we get the first inkling of something that apparently was going on in the comics. And, oh man, get ready to take a drink. Peter's kind of schizophrenic at this point. He is two people. He is Spider-Man, which refers to itself as the Spider. And then he is Peter. And he argues with himself in his head.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
I excuse me for a minute.
Uh-huh. The Spider
Okay.
The Spider does not want to go see Aunt May, but Peter eventually wins and goes in and has basically a monologue over his comatose aunt about how he needs to go home and hug his wife.
Who's not there?
So he gets home to find a note from MJ basically saying she's skipping town. The Spider, by the way, is like, told you. Because the Spider at this point is like, you don't need to be a human anymore. You just need to give yourself over to the Spider and just be a spider forever.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question that veers a little tangentically here. Wasn't there a series run where like he turned into a physical spider or split into two things, or after almost dying, and one was a spider person and one was Peter or something?
So
is that tied to this schizophrenia or not? I'm kind of curious.
There have been a couple. One was basically Man Spider, which you probably know from the Spider-Man and X-Men cartoons, because he goes to the X-Men to be like, "Am I a mutant now?" And they're like, "Nope, you're just fucked."
Sir, you are not a mutant.
He's like, "Fuck you guys, you're not going to take me in and help me or cure me. If you're a mutant, there's not a cure."
Right.
Shown us this plenty of times.
But the other, there was a different series called The Other, in which you find out that Peter Parker's powers didn't actually come from the fact that the spider was radioactive, but that it was a Mayan god spider that passed its spider abilities on to people.
That sounds kind of like what I'm thinking of, maybe?
Yeah.
Or like he was in a cocoon and burst out. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, Josh knows Spider-Man, so he'll probably catch what I'm guessing, what I'm asking.
Oh, man.
Were there two of him from that or something?
No, there was just one, but it was like he had embraced the spider totem at that point. So there was a period where then he had like natural web shooters, and it was a dark time.
As I said, random comics that I will pick up I would pick up at Barnes & Noble, one like had that where he, they thought he was dead. It's like the Avengers of Fantastic Four were like, "Oh no, Peter's dead."
Right.
And he shows up alive again, and he's got like, I guess the spider god talking to him in his head or something. So
Yep, all of that. So
again, was a tangent, but I wanted to find out.
So since Ben is in town, and he's already visited his old high school, he goes and breaks into May's house. Because he wants that personal connection again. Except Peter, leaving his house, goes to May's house and knows that he's there.
Entered.
Right. Except, interestingly, his spider sense does not go off. with the clone.
Is it clones when Peter shows up, or?
Yeah. No, neither of them.
Neither. Okay.
Their spider senses do not work on the others.
Yeah.
Mistaking him for a burglar, Peter chases Ben, but loses him immediately. As soon as he gets to the backyard, dude's gone. Peter goes to check if anything is missing and finds a journal from Miles Warren, the Jackal, from years and years ago. This makes the spider freak out and smash stuff because he is the only Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Ben visits May in the hospital when a nurse points out, oh, hey, Spider-Man's swinging by the window. Ben runs to the roof, trying to avoid seeing Peter, and runs into Peter taking off his Spider-Man costume. Peter goes ballistic, and Ben is just trying to escape, basically explaining.
Or just before that?
I'm sorry?
Didn't you say that they lived together for a little while and knew of each other?
Yeah, no, this is way before that.
Okay,
so everything I said about that is after this storyline. So they start fighting and they fall off the roof and plummet into a warehouse. I don't know why there's a warehouse right next to the hospital. And
it's just
gotta store your drugs somewhere. I mean,
yeah. It's like in Highlander when they fall through things and all of a sudden they're in a completely different location. And you're like, what?
The villain Portal was there, you see, and he opened a portal underneath them.
Yeah, it was like the Mortal Kombat arena change.
Mm-hmm.
So Ben, in order to try and calm him down, calls Peter by his name. But the spider is in control at that point and freaks out, beating Ben and saying that he hates Peter Parker. He is Spider-Man.
Yes, this is a real thing that happens. It's awful.
Awful is a word. Sorry, I hate Peter Parker. But you are Peter Parker. No, I'm Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ben gets the upper hand, reveals he is a clone of Peter, and then knocks Peter out. Meanwhile, a brand new villain named Judas Traveler appears in Ravencraft, which is Marvel's Arkham Asylum, and uses a different villain to send a psychic message to Peter Parker to face him or he will free all of the inmates. Peter gets this psychic message as he wakes up and is like, oh no, I must go be Spider-Man, and bounces out the top of the warehouse. Ben is still there and hidden, but sees Spider-Man leave and says that Peter is in no condition to fight alone, and he kind of pulls out his own Spider-Man costume and starts to follow him.
He's in no condition to fight alone. I just beat him up.
Yes. Also, Ben is like, Peter's borderline schizophrenic and has some issues.
Maybe he's going to the right place then to get some help.
I guess. So apparently, Mary Jane has not left yet, even though Peter found the note at their house, because she's meeting with her Aunt Anna, who is Aunt May's best friend, who's up from Florida to basically watch over May. And Aunt Anna asks where Peter is, to which MJ just stares in Spanish out the window like a soap opera person.
Yes.
In the animated series, her aunt hated Peter. Is that the same in the comics? Like, does she loathe him as much as she does in the animated series, or is that something they did for that?
I didn't get the impression from reading that she hated Peter. She definitely, she says that she's mad at him for essentially like being neglectful of MJ, but like,
and May and his entire family, really.
Yes.
He's never around.
Right.
I always got the impression she hated him for that and being poor and not having parents. That was always in the cartoon what I took away from it. She's like, how dare you be poor and have no parents, and how dare you be do what you do to Aunt May and Mary Jane. So
half of those are choices that people can control, and the other half is just...
I mean, he can control if his parents are not. I mean, if only he'd been a better son, right?
Right, yeah. Get alive parents. Get good.
And it's why she couldn't come up until now. She was in Florida being a keynote speaker at the GOP conference.
She was hanging out with her husband, Florida man, and...
The topic of her lecture is bootstraps.
And the laces we pull.
Right.
And my drunk pet alligator.
So, Peter arrives at Ravencraft, where the Traveler basically shows up and invites him inside to face a gauntlet or be responsible for him either killing the inmates or him just releasing all the inmates. It's important to note that Carnage is in here, which is a serial killer with a Venom symbiote.
I know Carnage because he was in the animated series too, so I know who he is.
Soon to be Woody Harrelson in the second Venom movie.
All right.
So I mean, one of those two things he offered is bad. I mean, letting all of them out. The other, I don't know, maybe the spider doesn't care.
The spider, in fact, does not care, and we'll get into that. So Peter goes through Ravencraft, seeing inmates still in their cells, but being basically, once he looks at them, the Traveler links his mind to the villain and gives him a glimpse of who he is through the trauma he has inflicted on the inmates, which I think out of all of this, probably my favorite part. This is a badass villain plan.
I would love to see that villain meet Batman and do that with his, because that could be interesting.
Trauma Wars coming out next May.
So the spider basically loses it, takes control, and Spider-Man climbs into a dark corner like a spider and just sits there basically shivering and hiding.
So wait, is that supposed to be in his mind that he's hiding and the spider take over? Or is this real life? You know, he's like, I connected your brains, and his body just says, I'm going to hide up here in the corner.
Yes, that second one.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's literally hiding in the corner.
So
Like
is it just linking, since he's got this schizophrenia going, is it linking Peter's mind or the spider's mind? Or are they the same thing in this?
They're the same thing currently. One may take over, and then they fight a lot, but basically this freaks out the spider so much, he's like, nope, in the fuck into this dark corner.
Noped right out. All right.
He sure did.
Aunt Anna takes MJ to LaGuardia, and MJ's about to leave, and then kind of has a change of mind and goes, no, I really think something must be going on. Peter's got to need me right now. To which Aunt Anna talks her out of it and convinces her to leave town to go and face her trauma with her parents or with her dad and sister.
Sorry. That's like Peter needs me. Fuck him. He don't need you. You're a strong, independent woman. Let's go.
That was almost verbatim what she said, to be fair.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Yeah, she is. She's not having it. She's like, nope, go and face your abusive father and sister. Get out while the getting's good.
You know, maybe he never got your note and didn't know to meet you here, but you're just imagining things. I'm sure he's not dead in an asylum somewhere.
So
literally, I'm looking at the page, and she literally says, if you don't make peace with the past and your sister and your father, you'll be no good for Peter, May, or anyone.
Yeah.
Damn.
Ouch.
Yeah, thanks for the tough love there, Aunt Anna, but fuck yourself.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, you're not good enough as you are. Go change.
So before Ben goes to help Peter, he takes a quick stop at the hospital to see Aunt May, and again, monologue over her comatose body. As for some reason, this is something that they need to do.
All of them. Next, the doctor comes in. I just got to explain what I got to do to this guy's spleen, and I got to talk it out. And, well, you're unconscious. It doesn't matter.
It is funny you should say that, because May's doctor does show up.
Yes.
Not to monologue, but instead to basically look at Ben and be like, oh, Peter, you look like you need somebody to talk to, and this whole thingy. Yeah, it's very weird. So the Traveler gives Peter a full mental breakdown. He's basically a gibbering mess on the ground. But before the Traveler ends him, he decides to look into Peter's mind and sees there's another Spider-Man and goes, oh, this experiment ain't over then.
Okay, so he looked in Peter's brain and realized there was another one. He didn't just know that Ben existed.
Nope. But then basically he ties up Peter and puts him in a cell and sends a psychic message to Ben, basically saying, "Hi, I'm the Traveler. I've captured Peter, so I'm going to give you a choice. You can come and face me and go through my gauntlet and save Peter, or you could let Peter die, and apparently that makes you Spider-Man. You could take over his life. So it's up to you."
Okay, random question.
Yeah.
The clone was force aged to Peter's age.
Yes.
So is this like one of those things where, like in Clone Wars, he keeps speed aging, or did they somehow stop it? Like if he's like, no, I'm just gonna let Peter die, is he gonna be dead in 2 years?
Unclear.
Yeah, really
however,
not clear.
considering that 5 years have passed and clone Peter, Ben has only aged as much as Peter has. It looks like he is aging normally.
Okay. I don't know, that might come into his mind of, fuck Peter. I mean,
Well, and he's
if we're
pretty
gonna
much
be honest.
right, and he is given that choice to be like, well,
He had a good run, it's my turn now.
So Ben monologues again over May's comatose body on whether or not he should save her true nephew, or whether he should take over Peter's life.
Let me guess, she wakes up and says, "Go save my nephew," and falls back down dead.
No, actually, probably would have been better.
I mean, that seems to be the obvious next step.
That might have actually ushered in a very welcome end to this series
Right.
a lot faster.
So he decides that he's going to go save Peter. And in something that's the first of the kind of telling the difference between Ben and Peter, he only puts on the mask and the gloves. He's still wearing jeans, a t-shirt, and like a puffy coat, like winter coat, and he leaves to go like start, or in a leather coat, actually, not a puffy winter coat. That's later. And starts web slinging to go and save Peter.
Okay.
Peter basically is sitting there in his own head fighting. Outwardly, he's sitting in a cell, straitjacketed up, just muttering, "Power, responsibility, power, responsibility."
I assume he does that every night. I mean,
maybe he's just asleep. Who knows? But yeah,
it's his reaffirmation. You got to have those once in a while to remember why you do what you do.
Right. Ben arrives at Ravencraft, and instead of being invited into the gauntlet by Traveler, he's flat out attacked by two assassins named Boone and Medea. Not the Medea you're thinking of.
I don't know who I'm supposed to be.
Okay.
From the Tyler Perry movies, Medea?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, I had to think for a second on that one.
I beat your ass, Spider-Man!
It would be hilarious to see that.
a very Medea Clone Saga coming up next.
A Clone Saga? Oh, God.
Everyone played by either Tyler Perry or Eddie Murphy.
That would be amazing.
With Jose Bautista as Spider-Man.
So, while they're attacking, though, like, there are shots that are very close to hitting him, and Boone reminds Medea that they are under orders from the Traveler not to kill him. So, back in Peter's head, he battles every single one of his supervillains, ending with, of course, the Green Goblin, before snapping out of his breakdown.
In the Asylum, Ravencraft, is this Peter's enemies? Like, you have Rhino and Electro and all them, or is this just random people?
It's
outside of Carnage.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a significant slice of people who don't like Peter Parker, to be sure.
J. Jonah Jameson? I had to throw that out. Come on.
He's not present in this film.
It is kind of like Arkham Asylum in that, your regular run-of-the-mill, not crazy villains are in an actual prison.
Right.
So this house is like Chameleon and Carnage and people like superpowered, both superpowered and non-superpowered people who are insane and in need of psychiatric care.
And where is S.H.I.E.L.D. when you need them?
Oh my God.
I mean, I half expect you to say, and then Nick Fury showed up, and
oh, who knows? And says, "Hey, Peter, I brought your parents with me."
I'm gonna borrow Chameleon because I need him for something, even though he can't get my eye patch on the right eye. Sorry, that's a cartoon reference.
So yeah, right as Peter breaks out of his breakdown, Ben has immobilized the assassins, and they team up to face the Traveler, who looks at them and basically is like, "Sleep," and they like are knocked out.
Okay.
At this point, a giant glowing barrier forms around Ravencraft, keeping people out, but also trapping a significant portion of the police and reporters that are outside.
Is it a giant green barrier? Do we expect Hal Jordan to show up here? I mean,
No.
I mean,
That's too much. Put some back.
didn't he like destroy an entire city or something? He could destroy Ravencraft here.
He remade an entire city, but yeah, that's god. If we ever have to do fucking phalanx, oh god.
Do I need to sign up for that?
No.
So both Peter and Ben awaken in the basement of Ravencraft. Peter immediately attacks Ben, thinking he's working with the Traveler. While they fight, Traveler releases all of the non-supervillain inmates on them. Basically just dudes, crazy dudes. Go fight. Peter begins savagely beating them. And Ben is horrified and tries to remind Peter that he's a hero. And then...
You're not J. Jonas Jameson's mass vigilante. You're a hero.
He then says if being Spider-Man is getting to Peter, Ben will gladly take over. This pisses the Spider off pretty bad, and he refuses. Outside, the glowing barrier basically somehow knocks out all of the police and reporters that are outside. They just drop to the ground. Peter and Ben team up when they are confronted by Wild Whip, who's a new villain that only Ben recognizes. So he's probably from the Lost Years, and I don't fucking care.
All I'm picturing in my head is that scene in Blues Brothers where they're in the country bar and you've got one of them with the whip.
Yeah, right?
That's what I'm picturing this guy looking like. It's just, one of the Blues Brothers with a whip there. That's what's in my mind's eye right now.
Do you remember Whiplash from Iron Man 2?
The guy that liked the bird?
Yes.
Okay.
Imagine that guy being an A-level villain somehow, and there being a C-level villain of him, and you have Wild Whip. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm taking a drink. That's all I'm saying to that.
They fight Wild Whip. Ben knocks him out, calling him a psychopath. When Carnage shows up in one of the best lines and says, "If he's he's an amateur psychopath. Get ready for the real deal."
Carnage is so proud of his staggeringly terrible mental illness. It's great.
He really is.
So tied into this, I did have a random question that came up in my head.
Sure.
I remember something about Ben Parker and Venom having a thing, and the way they interact together. Apparently, he has something with Venom. Is that tied into Carnage too, or what's that about? Do we know?
Ben Reilly or Ben Parker?
Ben Reilly. I think I just keep saying Ben Parker, but
you did. And I was like, what?
Yeah, no. I remember something about him and Venom being like antagonists specifically or something. So I
was gonna reveal this at the end of this, but this is the series that got me to stop reading Spider-Man for about 15 years. So this is the first time I've revisited this since I was a teenager in the 90s, buying these issues as they came out, and eventually not buying any more Spider-Man issues. So I don't know is the answer to that one.
That's fine. Like I said, random bits of things in my head. I just remember that Scarlet Spider and Venom had a thing where they, for some reason, hated each other more than Venom hated Spider-Man, and were constantly after each other or something. So
it sounds super plausible given what we've read so far. So sure, yeah, man, anything goes. All right.
And then Mary Jane got spider powers, and
if you dead ass said that to me, as it presented it as a fact, I would be like, yeah, I absolutely believe you.
It was called Spider Island, and everyone in New York got spider powers.
Comics.
It was a thing that happened.
I don't like how Black Cat has Captain America powers, but not, and somehow has morph powers from the X-Men.
Sure, why not? Comics.
As Carnage shows up as Carnage shows up, Ben is the one that points out that Carnage can't go into the basement. They have to keep Carnage from going into the basement because he's going to murder all of those regular people that are down there.
And the Spider says, sure.
The Spider starts to argue, but it gets through to Peter, and Peter takes control.
Okay.
So they put down Carnage and start to chase the Traveler, who gets into a limo. Ben, following him, basically double jumps and dives into the limo to chase him to find it's empty. And then the limo explodes.
So they somehow stopped Carnage, then saw the Traveler get in a limo to drive away. But Ben jumps in the limo that explodes.
And finds that it's empty, so there's nobody in the limo that they just saw the Traveler and his goons get into. There's nobody in there, and then it explodes. A la Vince McMahon would steal this many years later.
Okay. I'm sure he gets lots of his plot ideas from comics and Spider-Man. So
it was very poorly timed.
He's gonna explode.
Quiet, Nappa!
So Peter confronts. Peter basically sees that it was a mind illusion that the Traveler gave to Ben to get Ben to go into the limo, and confronts the Traveler. And the Traveler looks at him. His eyes go red, and Peter is knocked out again.
So was anyone driving the limo, or it just moved off on its own? I'm curious.
No, it was parked. It was like they were getting into it.
It didn't even go into motion.
Right. Okay, I was picturing it driving away, and him like melee double jump. He spins in the air and lands inside, like crashes through the sunroof, and
like Hudson Hawk. My pension. Yeah, no. Sprinkler system set up in the back. Can you fucking believe it?
Rodney Dangerfield is driving this limo. No respect.
So eventually, after Peter's knocked out, they flash forward to Traveler driving away with his team, and basically he says further study is needed. Meanwhile,
he just left Peter behind, or
yes, yep,
yeah,
okay. Hey, go to sleep. Bye.
Yep, yeah, he's like in the villain. He's like in the villain party bus, basically.
Right. Yeah. And the last scene of this goddamn storyline, some distance away, Ben is fine. He's gotten out of the limo somehow. Never explained.
No, explosions are little things like stubbing your toe. It's fine.
Right. Well, he's obviously immune to fire because he survived an incinerator. So. So the last scene is Ben wondering whether he should leave again or stay.
Yeah, we don't know what happened to Emma to Mary Jane. She said she was going to look for Peter.
No. Probably later, but that was as much of the Clone Saga as we're going to go through today, because Jesus fucking Christ.
I mean, I understand.
It is a lot. And I did accidentally read part of the Lost Years because it's part of the omnibus.
Yeah.
And
that's also where Kane comes in, which is a third clone of Peter Parker.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I knew I'd heard something about Jackal and some other guy, and then eventually Green Goblin shows up and all this stuff. So
yeah, at the end of all of this bullshit, somehow Green Goblin was responsible for the whole thing.
And then just when you say that Aunt May's in the hospital in a coma, I remember from the animated series where like Green Goblin shows up and she's saying the Lord's Prayer and he's kidnapping her and stuff. And that's all I'm thinking about.
That wasn't the animated series. That was...
Oh, was that the movie? I thought they did it in the animated series.
One of the movies. No, was it the first movie?
I think it was the first movie.
I'm racking my brain. I'm trying to recall. I think it might have been the first movie. Maybe. I think you're right.
Yep, first Spider-Man movie. Yep. Finish it. Deliver it from all. Yep.
And now I'm imagining the Green Goblin in Boondock Saints.
So Kyle, do you feel you have a good understanding of this part of the Clone Saga?
Just take the words "fucked up shit" over and over. I mean, that's what I'm taking away. But it's again, my experience for the Clone Saga was, like I said, random comic book of Scarlet Spider, and then random, the animated series where, they're like, oh, hey, we're going to clone this guy that uses water as a superpower that no one's heard of in the animated series, and clone of MSJ because she's disappeared, and suddenly they melt. And
so there was a comic called 1001 Ways to End the Clone Saga. That was it was a parody comic that Marvel officially released, and all it was people in the bullpen deciding different ways that they could somehow end the Clone Saga because it was a horrible disaster. And the only one that I remember that I loved was Ben, Peter, and May are walking out of a movie, and Ben just like immediately disintegrates and becomes a pile of ash. And and Mary Jane just goes, "Well, Peter, I guess you were the real one all along," and they just walk away. Like,
yeah, that's it. I would have accepted that. That's how it could have ended.
So things that come up in questions in my mind on this. My takeaway is that this got kind of too big. Is kind of my understanding, and too many people got involved because they kept adding in these new villains and changing things. What the fuck happened? I mean, did they have a plan to the start, and then Marvel said, "We want money, fuck y'all's," or what happened here?
So I do actually have part of an answer for this. The original story arc was only supposed to last a year. But from what I have read on the background of this, the folks in the bullpen or whatever, they just didn't really know. They didn't have the entire arc sketched out, and they kind of didn't know what they were doing with it or where it was going. And so it kept just sort of spiraling rapidly out of control for 20 years.
Yeah, there was...
They brought it back recently, or within the last 5-10 years, where they're like, "Oh, hey, his clone's still alive," and making more clones and trying not to dissolve. Wasn't there some storyline around that? The
clones being around were part of Spider-Verse and dealt much better in that. But there were other stories like the Mark of Cain, and because there are actually like 3 different clones of Peter Parker, Ben Reilly, Kane, and there was another one that I can't remember off the top of my head. And they all serve as villains / plot devices throughout. Kane actually served a really good purpose in Spider-Verse, and ends up being kind of the hero of that. The other example is like Judas Traveler, when they came up with Judas Traveler and introduced him. No one writing that book or coming up with him actually knew what his plan was.
Yeah.
So it was like the writers of Lost.
Also, too, the important point of background during this story arc is that because this was written in like the mid 90s, and that was during the point in time where Marvel was going through like a huge shakeup internally with their writers and their basically everybody on the back end, because they shifted from like, hey, let's make some comics, to, hey, let's make some money. It's the 80s, man. Let's just let's just merch all this to death and
gotta pay for our
that
cocaine
kind of thing.
somehow.
So what's that?
Gotta pay for our cocaine somehow. I mean,
exactly, pretty
much. Marvel meets White Wolf very much.
So, how was this received by fans? I mean, when it came out, what was the reaction? I mean, Josh, you told me earlier that it made you say "F you" to Spider-Man.
I have met many people that walked away from Spider-Man due to this.
Yeah, I mean, like in my household, just to give an example, I live in a household that's full of comics readers, and the place looks like a cross between a comic shop and a library. Like, and
it's my number one reason for getting a vaccine. I need to. I look towards Leia's house 3 times a day with a rug.
All you do, you tie a bag to your dog and say, "Quick, go get me a comic."
And my friend Adam is...
I was going to bring him up because I saw his reaction on Facebook when this came up, and I was going to ask, is his reaction normal, or tell me more?
So big Spider-Man fan, but when I told him that I was doing the Clone Saga for this podcast, he just like laughed for 45 minutes. And basically, it's been a running joke that the C word is banned from our household, but it's not the one you think. Because straight up his answer, because I was like, "What did you think of the Clone Saga?" And he's like, just dead ass was like, "It ruined my childhood." I was like, okay.
I am known so much amongst some of my circles of friends for hating the Clone Saga so bad that when the admittedly fantastic Spider-Man game came out for PS4, there was a single Scarlet Spider outfit that you could get. And when each of my friends from college ran across it, they would send me messages being like, have you gotten the Ben Reilly costume yet?
I saw Bill throwing shade at you from that when he finally started. So
well, the person that actually does most of the shade is Mark Parr, and he actually was the one that suggested the storyline and then said, "Oh, but I don't want to be on the show where you explain it to me." I'm like, "No, fuck you." So fuck you, Mark.
That's why I gave you several storylines to choose from. This was the one you seemed most excited about. So
it's not that I was the most excited about it. I knew that our audience would be excited about it.
And you knew that I'd be just super excited about it.
I can
Homer
feel such joy from here from you.
What?
So this is also the point to say that this is just the first of 3 Spider-Man storylines we will be doing in a row. We will be doing Sins Past next time, which is the famous J. Michael Straczynski of Babylon 5 fame that he wrote that secretly Gwen Stacy had left for Paris and had an affair with Norman Osborn, who had impregnated her and she had twins. This was the thing that happened. And then the band maybe more hated than Clone Saga, I'm not sure, but One More Day will be our third one, where Peter and Mary Jane sell their marriage to Mephisto for an old woman to live.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that also how he hides his identity after Civil War?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes and no. But also, seeing how he treats Aunt May in this, I'm like, this is the same guy that would sell his marriage? Really? Because
can't even visit her in the hospital?
It's very inconsistent and weird.
Indeed.
So, other questions I've had. So, let me ask this. I know you said there's more that comes from the storyline and everything.
Oh, God, yes.
Sadly.
Let me kind of tangential this. How many times have they tried to bring back these clones? And why don't they leave it dead if people hate it? As comic book experts, I'm asking your opinion.
It's funny because I did ask this exact question of housemate Adam, and he was just like, I have no earthly idea. He's like, I don't know why they kept bringing it back because people clearly did not enjoy it. I wish I had a good answer for you, but I really at this time do not have a good answer that I've ever heard.
So in general, Ben Reilly is not brought back that often. He sacrifices himself at the end of the larger Clone Saga in 1996, and Green Goblin kills him. He doesn't come back until basically like an arc called Spider-Geddon, which is this whole thing, but that's not until 2017. So he spends a good amount of time, 20 years not being around. Kane, who is the third clone, is used a lot better, I guess. Maybe because he's one step separated, because he's like, Ben Reilly was Peter Parker's clone that caused the Clone Saga, but then there's Kane, who was a villain for Ben Reilly for a while and then kind of became his own thing. He also doesn't look just like Peter Parker. He looks like Grizzly Adams.
So he has a beard.
Yes.
Gotta have the Happy Gilmore
and
reference.
and long hair. Grizzly Adams did have a beard.
Exactly.
But so there's that clone, and I guess I would say that there's enough creative people that redeemed Kane, but Ben Reilly was just dead and stayed that way for a long time.
With the Ben Reilly thing, didn't they have a Scarlet Spider run for a while?
They did.
How was that received?
Yeah, they did.
Poorly again, because it all came out from the Clone Saga. Basically, at the end of all of this, Peter and Mary Jane are like, okay, well, Peter has some major psychological issues, and they need to work on their marriage, and Aunt May is recovered, so we're not going to be Peter's not going to be Spider-Man anymore, and Ben takes over for like 2 years in the comics.
Now, is he the Scarlet Spider then, or is he wearing Spider-Man suit?
Nope,
Spider-Man?
He's the Scarlet Spider.
Yeah.
He still calls himself Spider-Man, and he's wearing the Scarlet Spider outfit,
the Back to the Future vest, and the weird,
and the barbed wire webs, the webs that are like a steel cable surrounded by string.
Now, they said, if I remember, didn't he have slightly different powers from Spider-Man in some way?
No.
Really? I thought he had, like, some of his powers were different or something somehow.
Nope. Now, at one point, he merges with Carnage. Then he has different powers.
What?
Yep. Yeah, that's a thing that happens.
But as just Ben Reilly, no, he has the same powers as Peter Parker. Yep. Yeah. So that has been the Clone Saga.
Now, was somebody somewhere, I remember in the back of my head, someone said, like, originally they wanted, like, Ben to be the real Parker at some point, and that Peter was the clone, and they
at one point that was a story.
Back.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that was, they deliberately left that part earlier, the kind of ambiguous, so that they could expand on, like, basically decide later whether or not they wanted to have him be a clone all along, or have him be the actual original Peter Parker, but they left it ambiguous, like, for that reason.
Right. So, like, at one point, it is somehow revealed that the Jackal gave a psychic whammy to Peter Parker to give him that I'm the clone psychic bomb that we talked about earlier when he saw. Yeah. So because there was an explosion and everyone was knocked out, nobody knows, and everybody had the same memories, nobody knows who the real one was. So yeah, there was a whole thing, and it was like Marvel kept trying to retcon themselves out of a hole, and it just pissed people off more.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. Oh,
Last
yeah.
question I have.
Go for it.
For each of you.
Yes.
How would you have changed or fixed this story?
Ooh.
Individually, each of you. How would you have changed or fixed this story? And Josh, no, just bringing in Gambit and Rogue. You can't just change the next
Oh, come on!
I know where your mind goes. No, you can't
Damn
just do
it.
that. Gotta keep it Spider-Man.
I guess that means I can't offer up the solution that Winter Soldier and Black Widow come in and just put a stop to everything in a rapid fashion.
Right.
Nah, let's keep it focused on the comic books.
This is for your own good, Rat-a-tat.
Pretty much.
That could be a solution. No more clones.
So my thoughts on it is that the premise was actually, like, the origin of it, the premise of the story was actually, that could have been really interesting. It could have been a very interesting plot line, especially the part where, the clone knows he's a clone and is trying to reconcile his identity with his, with the memories that have been implanted in him, et cetera, and so forth. And that actually could have been a worthwhile but very brief arc. It did not need to go on for more than maybe 8 issues, like max. Just wrap it all up in one 8-issue storyline, have it be done.
Have your ending in mind before you start it.
Right. That's something that I write on the side, but that's something that it's basically writing 101. You got to know where you're ending up before you tell the story. And they did not know where they were ending up, and they were just kind of seat of the pantsing it, and it shows. So I would have wrapped it up very quickly and then never mentioned it ever again.
So I feel like this could have also wrapped up some other storylines. The first thing is, this isn't just bad; it's bad on multiple levels. The general premise, not bad. I didn't mind the general premise. I would take out all the stuff about the ambiguity, who is this really Peter? Because you're just going to piss off people.
Right.
The idea of a clone of Peter that was made to destroy him, coming around to the side of good and becoming his cousin is actually a pretty good story. But it also is interesting because then you have things like the romance that people always wanted between Peter and Black Cat that didn't work. Well, now you have another Peter with all of those memories. So you could have had a great love interest for Black Cat without messing with the Peter Parker Mary Jane marriage. You could explore other stories,
I genuinely thought, as an aside, that this was going to end up with Clone Peter and Clone Gwen hooking up and, like, having their own thing.
Right, which it could have.
That would have been cool.
Yeah,
It would have been cool.
But again, Clone Gwen just disappears.
Disappears into the ether, never to be seen again.
Right. She
sure there wasn't a fridge nearby, right?
Oh no, because you actually see people in the fridge.
I had to ask.
For fans of West Wing, she went to Mandyville. it was so weird, and maybe it's explained in other comics, but it wasn't in the collected that we were reading for this and that we were studying for this. So, but yeah, so you have the opportunity to revisit a lot of Spider-Man stories that were pretty interesting. I think they got close to it when they, the whole idea of a Scarlet Spider Carnage is interesting. We'd see what would happen with it, but like a symbiote, Ben, maybe he can come to the full, understanding with that symbiote. And yeah, it's a lot of Peter Parker stories that I think weren't explored as fully as they could have been. You can do without messing with the original. It's almost like having a in 616 What If.
Right.
Now you're making me think of Mixed Courage and Scarlet Spider, and then have Venom and Spider-Man, the Black Spider-Man, having their own thing together. That would be kind of cool.
Right. But that's the thing, is you have the opportunity for a lot of stories. It was just so poorly executed, with horrible villains and plots that make no sense, and MJ deciding she needed to face her trauma for no reason.
Without talking to her husband about it.
Right, while he has schizophrenia.
And his aunt that raised him is in the hospital in a coma.
Right.
Yeah,
it's too much. It's too much. It's very, like I was saying earlier, very soap opera. We got to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and nothing stuck.
Yeah, and also as an aside too, so one of the things I always pay attention to when I go back and I do like older rereads like this is as I look at the art and the art style, and I'm very particular about the style of art that I like in comics. And this is definitely a product of its time in the art, because I don't think anybody who drew on this has ever seen or met a woman before. The body proportions and the hairstyles and everything, like they barely look human. It is the weirdest thing, and like I don't know if that's just me being spoiled by current art. It is. Comics.
I mean, it is, but it isn't. Like it's the '90s style. Like look through. Yeah. So for Graphically Novel, we're about to do the Netflix show Warrior Nun, which was pretty awesome. It's very Buffy-esque, without Joss Whedon being involved. But in looking, I was like, oh, it's based on a comic. Sweet. And unilaterally, we were like, oh, we're going to do this for season 5. And then I looked up what the comic was, and it's called Warrior Nun Azraelia. And it was in the same kind of vein as, Evil Ernie and Darkness and Witchblade and Chastity.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's like tits.
Yeah. And there was a lot of that going on too. Like I keep flashing back to there's a panel, and I don't remember what issue it's in. Don't ask me, but there's a panel that I came across where it's like, Mary Jane talking on the telephone. She's wearing this little crop top that's like hanging off of her tits. Her waist appears to be exactly like 5 inches in circumference, right, all the way around. But she's got these thighs that could kill a man. And I was like, I understand that all of these are individually could be considered attractive, except for maybe the very weird waistline. But like when you put them all together on a body like that, it's really jarring and weird. Like no woman looks like this. I promise you.
Right. But yeah, and it's like the Witchblade decides that it needs to protect its host by only covering her nipples, because her nipples are her Achilles nipple.
That's where we get our powers as women. So it's understandable.
So what I'm thinking of from what you're describing too is, this was years ago. I think it was Jim Hines. He's an author, but he would recreate poses of women from fantasy novel covers
with men
as a man. And do you remember that at all, Josh? Sounds like you do.
I do.
It was just hilarious because he always oh my god, my back.
There's another one too. That's the Hawkeye Initiative that takes the pretty gross looking art of female characters in comics and just replaces them with Hawkeye, which makes it hilarious. But yeah, it's very similar to that.
So final question that I kind of feel like would
final question.
Final question, because I mean, my last question I think is a great question for you guys, because if you're going to be explaining these things, especially on something like this where it was received bad, hearing about how you want to change it to make it better is kind of cool, especially for someone like me who's not involved with comics and, is more the TV side of things or occasional manga or just picked up things. So hearing that is really cool. The other thing that I think would be cool to hear from you is sell me on reading this. How would you do that?
Sir, I cannot do that. It's so bad.
I mean, I gotta ask. I mean, your whole thing is, I'm gonna explain this to you. Why should I read it?
At its core, it is still an important part, a bad part, but an important part of Spider-Man's history. So if you are into Spider-Man, this for better or for worse kicks off a lot.
Yeah. This is much like the House of M arc that we did last time. We're basically, like it or not, this sets off a absolute fuckload of plot lines down the road.
Okay.
So it's like your kind of your nexus, if you will, of where a lot of current storylines ended up. So it is kind of, I hate to say vital reading, but it does help if you have read some of this without losing your sanity, which is a very big ask.
I don't know, Josh. Do you have any sanity left?
It was rough. It was rough. I do want to go back and mention one thing, though, because you were talking about like the Hawkeye Initiative. I think a lot of the issues that have come up with that is Marvel has to know the backgrounds of their artists. And I haven't had a chance to discuss this in any of my podcasts before, but it is something that I feel very strongly on, because a lot of the backlash that people have gotten for like some of these, especially covers. So there's an artist named Milo Minara. He's an Italian comic book artist, and he's the one that did the infamous Spider-Woman like posing in a way that is impossible.
Yep.
He's an Italian erotics comics artist. Like, he writes erotic comics. That's what he does. That's his job. So when you're going to look at him or Frank Cho, if you want to look in America, who does Liberty Meadows, who again, lots of big tits, and that's a lot of his humor too. Is Liberty Meadows is about like, it's like if Doonesbury was almost pornographic. Like, it's
he's the one where like Spider-Woman is like on all fours on the ground. That one.
That's the Milo Minara one. But Frank Cho also does a lot of that kind, and they are friends. But Frank Cho does Liberty Meadows, which is like the main person is always losing her top and is almost topless, and one of the other characters is a pig that's always trying to get her to undress. Like, but if that's your genre and Marvel comes knocking at your door, you're not going to say no, but you're also going to do it in your style. So I feel like all this outrage towards the artist is unjustified, because there is a place for that art, and there is a place for those, storylines and things like that, because Liberty Meadows is pretty funny because in general, it takes that style and uses it in a way to point out misogyny and the things that art style typically is held up to represent. Milo Minara in the same way. I mean, he's a 75-year-old Italian, erotic comics artist. Yeah, if you hire him for something, he's going to make it sexy because that's what he does.
Right.
He wrote a series called Click, which was about a remote control that would turn women on if they had an injection of something. Like,
I was thinking the Adam Sandler movie, so I don't know.
Yeah. little different, not adapted from his work.
Yeah,
I don't. That was my first time. Like, is that based on that? I mean,
not really. But yeah, no, I totally hear what you're saying. Like, you got to know ahead of time. Like, if you're going to have an artist come and work on your stuff that isn't an erotic comic book,
right?
And you have, an erotic writer or artist or whatever who that's their specialty. Like, that's on you, man. Like, why did you make that choice? There are literally thousands upon thousands of artists out there that would drop everything to work on these books, that would not make every woman look like a sex doll. Like,
right.
You could have chosen one of them. Like, that would have been a good choice.
Right. It's like if you hire one of the artists that did The Darkness or Witchblade, because famously those comics are I mean, they're the storylines are still pretty good, but it is like those proportions do not exist on women by and large.
On human beings in general, I would argue.
Right. And you hire them to do a Ms. Marvel comic. Don't be shocked when your audience is up in arms because you chose the wrong artist for the job.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot of that that I've seen, at least in a couple of the older stories that we've been reading, that I'm just like, man, the art is just it's whack. And they may not have chosen the best possible artist to go with this particular story. And I feel like in modern comics, I think there's a little bit more, people are more savvy to that now, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, yeah, you look at, you recommended that I read the Kieran Gillen, Young Avengers.
Yes.
And
yes. I recommend that to everyone.
McKelvey is the artist on that one. I mean, everything is very real and very proportional. Right. Because that is also the writer that you're working with in the series that you're doing. But, you know, if you were to hire, again, Frank Cho to do this, you're going to get a bunch of 18 year olds.
It's going to look like something out of Barely Legal.
Right. It is. And that may not be what you're looking for. So I don't know. And maybe it's my wife talking after doing 5 seasons of graphically novel, but she is the art person, and she is very much talked about your art has to reflect your mood, and it has to reflect your project.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even in that case, like looking at the Clone Saga as we have, this was Marvel house style. But the other thing out of it is, for some reason, people look like they're melting randomly.
Yeah, it's real weird. It's very strange. And like, it's so funny because, you know, like I said, when I go back and read some of this older stuff that I read when I was a kid, you know, and I thought was just, you know, the absolute bee's knees as a kid. And I come back as an adult and I look at it and I'm like, this looks like a cartoon, like an actual cartoon, you know, style of art.
I mean, I'll be honest, art can draw me. I mean, that's what would get me to grab some of the comic books. Like I said, I mean, a lot of times it was just in a Barnes and Noble or in a bookstore or somewhere, because I didn't have a lot of comics in my house at all growing up, and the art was what made me grab it. Like the art in the comic where they showed off Spider-Man's new suit that Iron Man gave him. You know, I was like, hey,
Iron Spider suit. Yeah,
I'm like, the colors and everything look cool. I want to take a look at this. And it would get me to grab it. And I didn't really get into it because that wasn't the thing when I was growing up. But, you know, that's still, I find some of that stuff awesome. The art, the stories, the things like that, because I find this stuff cool, you know? Yeah. And it's just, but as someone who is like, well, maybe I can look at it now, a lot of this, like you said, there's a lot of backstory and things going on. So sometimes I feel, I mean, I'll be honest, I appreciate us doing this because I feel intimidated sometimes looking at things. Should I grab a graphic novel of these? Should I grab the omnibus? Should I grab am I going to be able to follow what's going on? Or am I, like with the changes to the X-Men that's going on now, with they have to go through portals and things to get to their special land, and oh look, Reed Richards' kids suddenly can't go through it anymore, or random stuff that I know. It's like, can I get into this or not? You know, and so that's a big question that I have when I'm looking at these things.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely, and like you're not alone in that by any way, shape, or form. Like you're not alone in thinking that. I mean, hell, I've been reading comics for most of my life. I mean, since I was able to pick up a book and read, and there are still things where I'm like, ooh, I don't know. You know, it just seems really intimidating to jump into, and there's so much out there and whatnot. You know, and I totally get that feeling. It's very relatable, and you are not alone in that in any way, shape, or form. I assure you.
Well, and this show, like, it's not just because Leia and I are somehow masochists that just want to do all this. It is because we do have a love of the comics and the storylines, and you know, even this season we're only doing one DC storyline because only one person asked us. But you know, even when we get into DC, that will be something that by and large we don't have a lot of experience with. But
I'm pretty well known amongst my friends of being very much not a DC person. I don't really know anything about DC at all except for very, very select niche things, and that is it. So it's going to be a journey.
I mean, I've seen some, like I said, I watched the cartoons grab. I watched Batman the Animated Series, best series ever. I mean, honestly, I mean, Batman Beyond, I watched that, and I think they did a great job with that. But on the DC side, that's really it. You know, Batman, you know, Superman, And
right.
They don't market or have things. I didn't grow up with, hey, here's a Green Lantern show, or yeah, they had the Flash and some things, but he seemed to be an idiot, a smart idiot that ran really fast. And I grew up watching Justice League and things like that. I watched Green Arrow when it was on TV, and things like that. But I think Marvel had the bigger presence growing up for someone like me, because that's what you saw, that's what you know. And it's just like, on the DC side, it's like, outside Batman, why should I care? And so I think, you laugh, but I'm serious. Why should I care about anyone but Batman? Superman, oh great, he's overpowered. Okay, why doesn't he just like, oh, you're being dumb, boom, I hit you with my laser eyes in the knees, now you can't walk.
Right.
They did the thing like, hey, what if he was a fastest dictator? Okay, but I don't care about Green Lantern. I don't care about Hawkman, or whatever.
Sure.
Why should I care about those? What are the stories that are going to pull me into those? I don't have answers for those.
I'd recommend going
totally
back. Some of our graphically novel episodes, we've done things like Doom Patrol. Our Wonder Woman episode, there is a fantastic Gail Simone
Wonder Woman
comic.
movie was great. I loved the original Wonder Woman. I haven't seen the new one, so I can't say anything about that. But I love the new one. I'm
gonna hold my opinion on 1984. But
haven't seen it, so I can't say.
Yep.
I've heard things about it, but I haven't seen it.
Right. But I will say, like, that's why we did graphically novel, to be like, if you watched a DC or a Marvel movie, here's your entry level comic book. Rhett Conversations is more for, I've heard about this storyline and it seemed like it was confusing and a lot of my friends didn't like it, so I never read it. Can you just break it down, and should I read it? And I think this is the first one that was rough, because it's not even divisive. It's pretty much
universally loathed.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It is. But it did create a lot of story later down the line, going even into what I can consider one of the best Spider-Man storylines of the last 10 years, which is Spider-Verse. And the clones did factor into Spider-Verse. So
tied into that, was it... Sorry, random things that are in my head. Wasn't Kane or one of the other clones involved with going into one of the other universes with Spider-Girl or something? Saved her or something like that I heard. Is that right?
That's all part of Spider-Verse. Oh, well, Kane was instrumental in Spider-Girl, which is an alternate universe storyline that was very, very good. Spider-Girl was pretty amazing.
That was when Parker lost his leg? Is that right?
Well, he was crippled. Okay. He walked with a cane. Yeah. But anyway,
sorry, off topic.
Maybe we'll cover those in the future. Do
you blame the writers?
Ourselves.
Yeah. Do you blame the writers for the Clone Saga, or do you blame Marvel, like execs?
A little column A, a little column B at that point.
Yeah, especially because of what was going on in the background at Marvel during the time that this was playing out, where they really did have a huge shift in essentially corporate values, and they really wanted to focus on just getting those dollar bills. Like I think it definitely played into that for sure.
I think that's a good question, because it's kind of like talked about. You said the writers didn't really know where they were going, but they're pushing through this storyline. It's interesting to know whether this was a writer problem and or an executive saying, we need money, get something out now.
I think it was, and I think that's reflective in so many things being tossed all in at the same time to try and get something to stick. Individually, having Aunt May have a coma, a stroke in a coma, or having a clone show up, or having a schizophrenic Spider versus Peter, all of them together don't work. Maybe if you had some nuance, or you could focus on one aspect, it would be better, but it was just too much. It was too much.
Yeah, I agree.
Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna, our next episode, as we said, will be another Spider-Man. We'll be diving into Sin's past, where Leia, Professor L, will be in charge of the speech on that one.
She doesn't have a wheelchair. She has a limo. That's what the L stands for.
Yes. My exploding limo.
But until next time, we'll see you later. And just to remind you, our theme music was done by Jared Adam of the wonderful Vandello, who is kind of our graphically novel in-house band. But yeah, until we explain Sins Past, take it away, Vandello.
Little wreck conversation, some deep reactions, please. All this comics narration ain't me. A little more talk, a lot less read. A little fight, baby, is what I need. Close the trade, open up your brains. Explain it to me. Explain it to me, baby. Explain it to me. Explain it to me, baby. Explain it to me. Vandello 2021.